You think you're free because no one is holding a gun to your head. But what if the prison was invisible? What if the bars were made of pleasure, cheap, constant, and available at the swipe of a finger every time you scroll, snack, stream, or shop? You aren't choosing freedom. You're choosing sedation. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to equate silence with danger, boredom with failure, and stillness with death. You weren't taught how to suffer. You were taught how to escape. Wake up. This isn't life. This is a slow drip of dopamine packaged as liberty. The real danger is not that you're suffering, it's that you're too numb to realize you're not. You've been fed just enough pleasure to never ask the one question that could set you free. Why am I running from the silence inside me? This is not entertainment. This is erosion. Your attention hijacked. Your inner voice drowned beneath synthetic delight. You say you're in control. But can you go 1 hour without reaching for your phone? 1 evening without a screen filling the void? 1 moment without some kind of stimulation propping up your collapsing attention span? No one is forcing you, but that's exactly the point. Modern slavery doesn't need chains. It needs comfort, because nothing enslaves more efficiently than pleasure that looks like choice. And no one saw this coming more clearly than Aldous Huxley in Brave New World. Huxley didn't warn of tyranny by pain. He warned of tyranny by ecstasy. A world where people wouldn't have to be controlled by violence because they would be addicted to their own submission. Where truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Where people wouldn't rebel because there would be nothing to rebel against, just waves of curated satisfaction, synthetic joy, and manufactured peace. It wasn't Orwell's world of oppression. It was Huxley's world of overdose. That world is no longer fiction. It is the one you wake up to every morning. You are living in the exact scenario Huxley envisioned. A culture that doesn't destroy your thoughts. It dissolves your capacity to have them. And the worst part? You've been taught to love it. Think about it. You don't wake up and reflect. You wake up and scroll. You don't feel your feelings. You sedate them. You don't confront pain. You outsource it to food, porn, validation, or digital noise. What you call freedom is a behavioral loop. What you think is preference is programming. The system doesn't need to coerce you. It only needs to keep you comfortable, just enough to prevent the existential crisis from ever emerging. And you're not alone. This is global, a civilization addicted to ease, drowning in options, but starving for meaning. People don't know how to sit in silence anymore. They panic in stillness. They need noise, stimulation, distraction, because when the screen turns off, the mirror turns on. And when they finally see themselves, it terrifies them. But here's the truth that no algorithm wants you to hear. The more pleasure you consume, the less freedom you possess. Every hit of dopamine that isn't earned through meaning is a tiny act of self-erasure. Every comfort you chase to avoid discomfort is another link in your invisible chain. You were not meant to be endlessly entertained. You were meant to evolve. And evolution only happens in the fire of discomfort, not in the warm bath of convenience. But if you've never been taught how to sit in that fire, of course you'll run from it. You were trained to. You were taught that pain is a problem, not a process. That sadness is a symptom, not a signal. That boredom is a threat, not a threshold. And that is the genius of modern slavery. It makes you believe that your chains are pillows. If this is speaking to something buried in your bones, you're not broken. You're waking up. You're starting to see what they've tried so hard to keep hidden behind glowing screens and endless dopamine loops. You're starting to feel the weight of a truth that's been anesthetized your entire life. That maybe, just maybe, comfort has cost you your consciousness. We're just getting started. In the next section, you'll see exactly how the system was engineered to reward obedience, how dopamine has been weaponized, and how your ability to think, suffer, and grow has been methodically dismantled, not by accident, but by design. If you want to keep seeing content like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because platforms don't reward truth, they bury it. But if you're here, you're one of the few still able to see what's real. You weren't born afraid of discomfort. You were trained to be, slowly, consistently, systematically. From the moment your nervous system could feel agitation, someone was there to soothe it, not with wisdom, but with stimulation. A toy, a treat, a screen, a song, and that was just the beginning. What you thought was care was the first lesson in distraction, the first lesson in emotional evasion. Pain wasn't something to understand, it was something to avoid. By the time you learned to walk, you were already being conditioned. Television rewarded your attention with noise. School rewarded your obedience with stars, and by the time you were old enough to question the world around you, you no longer had the capacity to sit still long enough to ask the right questions. Your brain had already been rewired. In the documentary The Social Dilemma, the very engineers who built Facebook, Google, and Twitter admitted they wouldn't let their own children use the apps they created. One designer confessed that every time he got a notification, it felt like his brain had been hacked. Another likened social media feeds to a digital pacifier for adults, carefully calibrated to exploit your brain's weakness for novelty and reward. These weren't tools built for connection. They were weapons forged for attention capture. What started as comfort became programming. What started as nurture became sedation. The science is brutally elegant. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of desire, doesn't fire only when you receive pleasure. It fires in anticipation of it. Every ping, every scroll, every like is a hit. And like any hit, it fades fast. So you chase the next one, then the next. Not because you want it, but because your brain, now hijacked, demands it. The system knows this. It's built around it. Social media isn't a tool. It's a slot machine, designed by behavioral engineers, guided by neuroscience, optimized for compulsion. Every swipe is reinforcement. Every like is validation. Every notification is a miniature high. You don't use the app uses you. You weren't given access to pleasure. You were fed dependence. This is no accident. It's architecture. The modern world is engineered to keep you in a low-grade trance, a state of continuous seeking without ever arriving. When you scroll, you're not consuming content. You're being consumed. Your time, your focus, your sovereignty, all harvested in exchange for the illusion of entertainment. And the social dilemma pulled the curtain back further. Algorithms don't just predict your behavior, they shape it. They learn what outrages you, what seduces you, what frightens you, and then feed it to you again and again. Not because it's true, but because it works. What you see isn't what's real, it's what makes you stay. The algorithms aren't evil. They're indifferent. They don't care what makes you happy. They care what keeps you clicking. Outrage, fear, lust, envy. These emotions drive engagement because they bypass the rational mind. And the more you engage, the more your identity is shaped by the very forces that profit from your disintegration. And here's the psychological bombshell. The more often you escape discomfort with pleasure, the more intolerable discomfort becomes. Your tolerance shrinks. Your resilience atrophies. Your soul, once capable of facing the unknown, now flinches at silence. You've been domesticated. A wild mind questions. A wild soul rebels. But a comfortable, overstimulated being, that's manageable, predictable, profitable. If they can make you reject discomfort, they don't need to suppress your thoughts. You'll silence them yourself. If they can make you fear stillness, they don't need to hide truth. You'll be too busy running to see it. Aldous Huxley knew this. He saw a future not of censorship, but of saturation. Not of pain, but of pacification. In Brave New World, people weren't punished for dissent. They simply never developed the will to dissent. They were taught from birth that anything unpleasant was not to be endured, but eliminated. The result was a society of emotionally sterilized beings, safe, sedated, and spiritually extinct. Look around. You live in that world. Only the drugs are different. Instead of Soma, it's TikTok. Instead of hypnopedic mantras, it's influencer sound bites. Instead of state-run programming, it's algorithmic preference shaping. And the outcome is the same. A society that doesn't question, not because it's forbidden, but because it's forgotten how. What do you call a generation that panics when left alone with their thoughts? A generation that cannot tolerate 5 minutes of boredom without dopamine. You call it programmable. You call it compliant. You call it conquered. And the tragedy is this. The more you avoid discomfort, the more discomfort controls you. You don't choose what to focus on. Your impulses do. You don't follow purpose, you follow cravings, and you call it freedom. But here's the truth. They've hidden under endless waves of distraction. If pain terrifies you, you'll never awaken. Because the path to awakening is lined with discomfort. It forces you to sit in silence and face the very thing the system trained you to avoid. Yourself. That's where the real war is happening. Not in the streets, not on your screen, but inside you, in the space between one urge and the next, in the choice to feel instead of flee, in the decision to stay when everything in your nervous system tells you to run. Because if you can't endure discomfort, you can't rebel. If you can't pause, you can't perceive. And if you can't perceive, you're not living. You're looping. And this is the part no one wants you to realize. Your weakness is profitable. Your distraction is someone's revenue. Your compulsions are not random. They were engineered. In the next section, we'll go deeper into what this system has truly taken from you. Not your time, not just your attention, but your very capacity to become someone strong, someone sovereign, someone unbreakable. What happens to a muscle that's never used? It atrophies. What happens to a soul that never suffers? The same. When pain is pathologized and difficulty is medicated, something essential begins to decay. Not just your strength, but your sense of self. Because meaning isn't born in comfort, it's born in fire. And if all you ever do is chase the next hit of pleasure, you never stay in the flames long enough to become anything real. That's why you feel empty after pleasure. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded in numbing the very thing that made you human. Your capacity to endure, to adapt, to overcome. Every time you reach for a distraction instead of sitting with discomfort, you make a trade. You trade your spine for silence. You trade potential for sedation. You tell your nervous system, I can't handle this. And the body listens. It adapts. It weakens, not by punishment, but by design. Because no part of you will grow in an environment that tells it to stay comfortable. This is the collapse of resilience. Not dramatic, not explosive, subtle, silent. It happens in the background of everyday life. A moment of anxiety. Scroll, a hint of sadness. Snack, a flicker of loneliness. Swipe. Every micro escape chips away at your threshold, until even a small pause feels unbearable, until stillness becomes torture, until reflection becomes impossible. And this isn't just psychological, it's existential. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." He didn't say that to sound wise. He said it because he saw men die without it, in the worst conditions imaginable. Starvation, cold, brutality. Some survived not because they were physically strong, but because they found meaning in their suffering. Those who couldn't faded. Frankl's insight is the antidote to modern emptiness. He understood what society has forgotten. Pain is not the enemy. It's the portal. It forges character, refines desire, burns off illusions. A life stripped of hardship isn't paradise. It's purgatory. But today, suffering is seen as failure, discomfort as disease, and meaning optional. We medicate away anxiety instead of asking what it's trying to teach us. We pathologize grief instead of letting it shape us. We run from anything that requires patience, depth, or reflection because it doesn't offer instant reward. But here's the dark truth. Pleasure doesn't satisfy. It soothes. And soothing is not healing. Soothing keeps the wound quiet long enough for you to forget it's still bleeding. This is why so many live with chronic dissatisfaction. Not because their lives are terrible, but because they're too comfortable to awaken and too numb to care. Their days are full of pleasure, but their nights echo with something hollow. That echo is the voice of purpose neglected, exiled, waiting for permission to return. And purpose doesn't speak through dopamine. It speaks through struggle, through discomfort, through moments of pain that demand a response deeper than consumption, a reason, a why. But finding your why requires standing still long enough to hear it. And that means confronting the very things you've been taught to flee: fear, sorrow, rejection, silence, not once, repeatedly, until your nervous system stops flinching, until stillness becomes strength. Because the only way out of this sedated loop is through boredom, through withdrawal, through the psychological tremors of detoxing from dopamine. And what lies on the other side isn't more happiness. It's capacity, the kind of grounded power that comes not from avoiding life, but from letting it scar you in the right ways. You weren't meant to be happy all the time. You were meant to become someone, and the price of becoming is pain. Every ancient tradition knew this. Initiation, pilgrimage, fasting, silence. All paths of transformation begin with deprivation, not as punishment, but as preparation. You strip away comfort so the soul has a chance to speak. You break the addiction to ease so the real self can surface. You confront death in some symbolic form, so that when you return, you carry something unshakable. But today, we reject all of that. We don't fast. We binge. We don't reflect. We scroll. We don't endure. We medicate. And in doing so, we rob ourselves of the very experiences that create depth. So of course we're fragile. Of course we're manipulable. Of course, a few comments, a minor rejection, a slight inconvenience can collapse someone's world because there's nothing holding it up. No root, no resilience, just a life built on stimulus response loops and the illusion of agency. But what if that could change? What if the emptiness you feel wasn't a flaw, but a signal? What if it was your soul refusing to be sedated one more day? Because the truth is, there is a path out, but it's not easy. It's not quick. It's not soothing. It begins where most people quit, at the threshold of discomfort, and only those willing to stand there, trembling, uncertain, in the dark, will ever find what they're really looking for. In the next section, you'll discover how to break this cycle, not by running faster, but by finally stopping, not by chasing happiness, but by choosing purpose, and why purpose will demand everything comfort promised to protect you from. You want to be free? Then you must do what the sedated cannot. You must walk back into the fire, not because you enjoy pain, but because you remember what pain was always trying to do, wake you up. The final rebellion is not loud, it is not violent, it is not posted on a screen, it is internal, invisible, and irreversible. It begins the moment you stop chasing dopamine and start reclaiming your mind. Step 1 is strategic deprivation. This is not asceticism. This is war, a calculated withdrawal from the pleasure loops that keep you obedient, not forever, just long enough to reset the nervous system, to break the chemical trance that tells you comfort is king. You don't have to destroy your phone. You have to interrupt its control. You don't have to hate entertainment. You have to stop needing it. The point is to feel the tremble that happens when you go without the hit and stay there. That tremble is your soul remembering it exists. Step 2 is rebuilding your tolerance for discomfort. Sit in silence and let it ache. Feel boredom crawl under your skin. Watch how your body reacts, how your mind panics. Don't run. Stay. The longer you stay, the quieter the panic becomes, eventually. Discomfort becomes data, a message, a mirror. It shows you where you've been hijacked, where you've outsourced strength to convenience. This is where real confidence is born. Not in the absence of fear, but in the capacity to befriend it. Step 3 is radical critical thought. Start asking questions. No one wants you to ask. Who profits from your distraction? Who benefits from your helplessness? Who designed the systems that train you to consume more and feel less? When you begin to trace your behaviors back to their origin, you start to see that most of what you call choice is actually conditioning. And when you see the strings, you are no longer a puppet. You become a player. You stop reacting and begin reconstructing. And finally, step 4. Replace pleasure with purpose. This isn't a slogan, it's a severing. You cannot live in both worlds. A purposeful life requires sacrifices. It demands delay. It refuses to perform for applause, but it gives you something dopamine never can. Identity. Purpose doesn't sedate. It sharpens. It doesn't soothe. It summons. You wake up differently when your life means something. You endure differently. You walk through rejection, failure, chaos, not because you like it, but because you're finally carrying something worth suffering for. And when you do, something changes. You become harder to manipulate, harder to seduce, harder to distract. You stop chasing peace, because you realize peace was never out there. It was what was left when you stopped betraying yourself. But this transformation doesn't happen in secret. When you reclaim your pain, the system feels it. When you stop numbing, others notice. Your silence becomes threatening. Your stillness becomes suspicious. People will call you distant, cold, arrogant. They won't understand why you no longer participate in the shared hypnosis. And that's the cost. When you wake up in a dream everyone else is still enjoying, you become the glitch. A free mind terrifies systems built on sedation. It doesn't need affirmation. It doesn't need noise. It doesn't need to perform. And that kind of sovereignty is contagious. Dangerous because it reminds others of the freedom they abandoned for comfort. So if you're going to walk this path, understand this. It will not be applauded. It will not be easy. It will cost you your illusions. But what you gain cannot be stolen. Purpose gives you spine. It gives you vision. It gives you the courage to hold steady while the world begs you to fold. And maybe that's why they never taught you to suffer. Because if you learned how to suffer well, you'd become untouchable. And untouchable people cannot be controlled. If this has stirred something in you, don't just consume it. Act on it. Cut the loop. Question the noise. Train your pain. Build your purpose. And if you want to keep exploring the truths that were never meant to be mainstream, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next war won't be fought with weapons. It will be fought with attention. And those who can't control theirs will be controlled. But if you remember one thing, just one, it's this. You don't defeat the system by escaping pain. You defeat it by making pain your teacher.